Okay, so welcome to our AAA rated exam preparation class. I'm presuming that you've had a run through the lectures. Maybe you haven't been through them all, but I'm hoping that you've been through the bulk of them. And I have, in those lectures, tried to it's a sort of a combined taught and revision course. So I know that when I did those classes, I did attempt to be doing a bit of revision as we went. So I know that you'll have seen a little bit of this before. So I'm not going to make it just a straight, right, here's the top 5 things that are going to come up, et cetera, because I'm assuming you've seen all that because I talked a lot about that in the sessions. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to think a bit more specifically about the exam. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on a paper. So I'm just going to take a paper, and it's not so much that I'm going to work through it. We're going to look at it together. I'm going to look at the answers, and we're going to look at the mark schemes to try and bring it all together as to how you should be thinking about the paper, how you should be preparing for the paper, and ultimately how you should be answering the paper physically in the exam. So I'm not sure how much of a chance you've had to look at papers in the exam software. So I want to do that as we go. I want to get you thinking about how you're going to use your time, how you're going to build your answers, because again, I talked a lot about in the lectures about answer planning, and I want to revisit that, and I want to think about how you build your answer, etc. Okay, now I'm also conscious that Marlo mentioned in the message that I'd be taking questions, and I'm more than happy to take any questions as we go through. I'll leave a bit of time at the end for a question and answer if you want to just throw anything in, but feel free in the chat to put anything at all as we're going, as I'm working through. Just throw things in the chat. I'm happy to answer as we go, or I'm also happy if you unmute. Feel free, just because I'm yammering on, which I do. Just don't think that you can't just unmute your mic and just ask me something. That's absolutely fine as well. I wanted this session to be a bit like that, but I know it's difficult in the sort of online environment to get that. For you to feel comfortable doing that. So feel free to put them in the chat. Feel free to unmute and just ask. That's all absolutely fine. I think by doing what I'm going to do here, I'm hoping that it will bring together a few bits, maybe also get you thinking about a few areas of the syllabus that you might want to focus on between here and the exam, and just get you ready for that final push into the exam. Okay, is that okay with everyone? Is everyone happy? So let's just check the thumbs here. So thumbs up if you understand what we're doing, you're happy with that, etc., etc. Again, opportunity in the chat to throw stuff in there if you want. Okay, so I'm going to have a look at a paper in the software. Now, the paper is the most recent, March-June 21. I will put a copy of the questions in the chat. There they are. I'll not put a copy of the answers in just yet. We'll see about that. Now, again, look, first thing I would say is you should at this point be taking the opportunity to go into the software, use it, answer in there, all those things that you would expect to be doing. And I know that that is a pain because this paper is a pain. I get that because it takes such a long time. It's not like, one of the calculations papers where you can take a past paper, bang out the calculations and then think, oh, well, yeah, I'd have said this, I'd have said that, I'd have said the other. It's more, if you don't write down, if you don't have a go at the question, you might be telling yourself that you would have said this and you would have said that, particularly when you go through the answer. but you might not necessarily have done so, or you might have said it in a different way and not picked up that that other way wasn't going to get the marks that you were looking for if you hadn't written it out and then gone through the answer in a bit of detail to understand exactly how it should have been answered. Okay, so it is important that you do this. I am going to, so I've just logged into the practice area. I've got the AA ones. I've allocated myself some of them. Let's make sure I get the right one. Yeah, the March, June 21. Okay, so I start that and go through. Yep, thanks for that. Make sure you read all this stuff in advance. I do not want you to be reading this on the day. Know it, be aware, be ready. Okay. Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so this time's not limited. Yours will be. 2 sections, got to answer them all. We know that. What's it going to look like? Are you ready to begin your exam? Yes, I am. Okay. Yeah, make sure, so there are a couple of important things here. Indicate what requirement your responses relate to, so it's clear for the markers, obviously. Show all notes and workings you want the marker to see. Again, notes and markings on the scratch pad will not be recorded. So if you want the examiner to see it, put it in. Okay, now that's important for us, particularly because of the paper. Okay, so look, this is the paper as it would appear. You've got most of the information in different sections down the left-hand side. You've got the requirement here. Each of these is going to open in a different window. You've got briefing notes and you've got a spreadsheet. Now, there's very little on this question or this paper that you're going to use the spreadsheet. So it's these briefing notes that are the most important. That's where your answers are going to go. Okay. Yeah, so look, it doesn't really matter if you've entered the UK paper. It's the same paper, so no panic. There is a little bit on the difference between UK and IFRS. So in the Kaplan book, just look up the section for the UK specific paper. The other thing you will note in the UK paper is that it just says, like in this one, look, we've got requirement 50 marks. And it breaks down the requirement. Sorry, where's the email? There it is there. So in this one, it says, right, 10 marks for this, 20 marks for this, 6 marks for this, 10 marks for this. In the UK paper, it doesn't. It just says 40 marks altogether. But you can sort of tell now from the headings and so on in the paper, which, no, don't have heart failure, it's fine. You can tell how much it's worth by what it's asking for and the headings that they give you. So there's sort of 5 business risks, there's 5 headings. That tells you there's 5 business risks, 2 marks for each 10 marks. And audit risks, you're going to get a few more marks, 3 marks. So there's going to be a few more of those. So like, don't panic. It doesn't really matter. I think the international paper is a little easier just because you don't have any UK stuff. Not that there's very much UK stuff in the other one anyway, and it does give you the breakdown of the marks. The only difference between them is that the UK paper, if you want to be an auditor, if you want an audit certificate, you need to do the UK paper, whereas the international paper doesn't get you the UK auditing certificate. That's different from an accounting practice certificate, by the way. You can still prepare accounts, you just can't sign off on audit. And there's other things you need for an audit certificate anyway. So if you've signed up the UK paper, that's fine. Same paper, essentially. In fact, to set your mind at ease, what you might want to do is over the next few days, just either print out or look at side by side the last 2 or 3 papers, the UK, the international. You'll see that it's the same paper exactly. There's maybe the odd 3 marks here or there that might be different, but it's neither here nor there, except for the marks being broken down in question 1. Okay, so no need to panic at this point. Okay, so look, we need to think about how we're actually going to do this. So before we had the computer, what I would have been saying to you is to make out a plan. Okay, so you got to plan your answer. And essentially you'd have been planning bullet points. You'd had a physical paper. I would have told you to bring in highlighters and markers. I would have said, right, highlight the important bits and put a little note to yourself as to why it's important on the physical exam paper. Then bullet point that out in your answer booklet, and then start your answer. Okay. Now, you don't have to do that now. You've got a much simpler way to kick into the answer here and to answer plan. Now, I'll have talked a little bit about this in the lectures as well, but it's a really fundamental point because it's going to help you to manage your time, manage your marks, and manage the physical act of actually filling in your answer on the screen, because that's not easy with all these windows opening here and there. Do you keep the requirement window open when you're doing the other things? Do you know which bit you're working on? You know, how do you actually physically get from point A to point B, i.e. empty box to written answer? And my answer to that is you do it in stages. Okay. So if I was approaching this question, I would be opening the partner's email up first to see what my requirements are. Not only that, I would start at this point to build up my answer. So I'd open my briefing notes, and my answer planning and my answer are going to be done essentially at the same time. So I'm going to try and keep this a bit bigger just so that you can see it, but it doesn't really matter. The essential point is that I'll be starting my answer straight away. So I'd be saying, right, question 1 to make sure that they know what I'm doing. It is briefing notes, so I'll remind myself to do a little bit of an intro. Remember, I'm only in the answer plan at this point. And then at part A. Now, do you know what? I haven't been in the live exam, so I'm not sure if you can, but if you could, I would copy and paste that across. Okay. Does anyone know if you can do that in the live software? If you pop it in the chat, just as we're doing this. If you can't, I would just be putting business risks. So in fact, I might even just say, you know, that's my title. Okay. And I would be putting in the 10 marks. And you know what? I'd be bolding it. Okay. So we think we can. Okay. So that's good. If you can, I'll be copying and pasting that in. Yeah. So excellent. I thought they said that, but I'm never sure if they're 100% accurate as to what you can do in the live software and what you can do in this one. Either way, if you can, copy to paste. If you can't, I just put business risks and 10 marks. Okay. And then I'd be leaving myself a bit of space, and I'd be putting in the next requirement. Okay. So I'd be saying, right, part B. And I'd be putting in that. Being careful to leave the number of marks. Remember, you're not going to be marked down just for leaving that in. So that's not a problem. Okay, then we're on to part C. And I'd even put those in. Now this one, I might not copy all of that over. Well, actually, yeah, I probably would. I'd just copy it all over. Okay, 6 marks. Again, I'm leaving the marks in there for my own benefit. And then D. These ones. And again, leaving the marks in there. Okay, now what this is going to do is it's already started me with an answer plan. And the other thing it's done is it means I don't have to keep going back to the partner's email to find out what it is I need to do, because I want to minimize the number of times that I'm sort of closing windows, opening windows, going to other things. I just want to open it up and I want to know what I have to do, and I want to start from there. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to do. You need to think, right, start your answer planning by literally bringing in the requirements. So you've got a heading already, you've got a starting point. Now, previously, when we were doing this with paper and pen, you couldn't do that because obviously you can't create space in between the requirements. You'd have to leave pages in between. You never know how much. It was much more difficult. Okay, so it's obviously now going to be much easier to go through and create the answer plan. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Can you give me a thumbs up if we're on track here? Can you give me a question at this point? So I'll pause just for a second just to see if anybody has anything at this point they want to even point out to me, say, question, anything at all. No, everyone seems okay. Feel free, put it in the chat. I'll keep monitoring the chat as we go here so that we can understand this. Okay, now, I'm going to talk a bit because I want you to get a bit of content out of this as well, not just thinking about the physicality of doing the exam. I want you to think about what we're being asked to do here. So part A is business risks to be considered in the audit, okay? And part B is audit risks. Now, it's in the planning stage. So you got to think to yourself, well, planning stage, when does that actually physically happen? It's before the year end even. It's at the very start. We're trying to understand where there are risks and then where they might manifest in the financial statements. So business risks. Business risks are much more general, okay? Remember, this is that top-down approach. It's taking a high-level look at the business and saying, right, what are the risks and how might they manifest? But it's much more general, okay? So I'm not saying you write this in the exam, but in fact you might, because if you know what you're looking for, it might be worth noting it down. So risks in the client business, okay? You're looking for what might go wrong. And crucially, you need to explain what the result will be. And if possible, relate it to a number. Okay, because you will get extra marks for that. And I always note, in fact, I might even read it first, that there are key performance indicators here. If there are numbers given to me in one of these question ones, that's the thing I'm most interested in because I can pick up extra marks. It starts to give me an overview of the business even before I start reading through any of the content. And it's invariably really important, okay? So that's what we're looking for when we're looking for business risks. The other thing to point out whenever we're thinking about business risks is that they're not actually that difficult, okay? That means that you're not going to get as many marks for them as you would for an audit risk. So I would be budgeting 2 marks maximum for a business risk. So you've got 10 marks here. I therefore would be looking for 5 to 6 risks, okay? Because it's going to be 2 marks max. Now I might be able to bulk that out if they're going to give me extra marks for numbers, but that might not be the case. Okay, so I'm looking for 5 to 6 of the risks, 2 marks max. We're good to go. Okay. Now I might, if I was you and I was at your stage, I was the sort of person who might do this, who might actually note those things down so that it reminds me that that's what a business risk is. That's what I'm looking for. And that's how I'm going to explain it, because it's very easy with business risks to go too general and to say, oh, well, there's a business risk that they're doing this and it might fail and that could be very damaging to the business and yada, yada, yada. And those things are a good starting point, but you've got to go specific. You've got to say what could go wrong? What would the result be? You know, and then maybe relate it to the number by saying, oh, well, we can already see that this is happening, or we can already see that that is happening. Okay, so let's have a quick look and we'll just see if we can pick out a couple of these and think about how we would actually be considering them. Okay, so accounting policies, look, I know that that is relating to something else, so I'm not going to bother. International expansion, okay, so we look through this, yada, yada, yada. They've got this international expansion. Now, again, I'm not particularly bothered in this about the actual content. That's not what I'm trying to get at here for tonight. Tonight, I'm trying to get at your approach, how you build it, how you think step by step. So when you've read through this, I hope you would come to the conclusion that you would need a heading called international expansion. Okay, now I might even call it risk one. And why might I do that? Because lots of times whenever I mark these papers, students just talk too generally, and they don't actually say the risk here is that. Okay, so that's what I want you to be doing. Now, I've said in the lectures that you should have a paragraph that you repeat. Okay, and in this case, you'd be saying, well, look, let's say we're just planning. Okay, so what would I be saying under this? I would be saying, right, risk of failure of expansion. Okay, I might be saying that this could result in, like, what have they got? Yeah, this resulted in it not being as profitable as expected. Less profit. Again, because business risks are more general. Now, note, I'm not talking about okay, Una, anyone else lost volume? Let's ask it the other way around. Everybody hearing me? So give me a thumbs up if you're still hearing me, okay? And then we'll see. Yeah, okay, it's okay, so not as profitable as expected, less profit. They've also got this rainforest asset. So you might be thinking about the asset being overvalued, although again, you don't want to go into too much. I think more like an overvaluation more generally of the area of the business. Okay, so we're thinking generally that division could be overvalued. It's not going to be as profitable as they expected. The expansion fails, okay? And what you would then be doing is thinking, well, okay, is there anything to support that? Because remember, we want to bulk this out with the numbers, okay? So you want to be thinking, well, look, is there anything in the numbers that supports what I'm saying here? So this is why I think it's important that you've read the KPIs. So if you are given numbers, make sure that you have a look and see if there's anything in there that is related. Now, I don't think for this one, let me just have a look. I don't think for this one you could have really related to a number because it's sort of future risk. So you're just saying, look, there's a risk in the future that they don't, that this isn't as successful as they thought, that it's not as profitable as they wished. Okay, so that would be my plan. Okay, so I'm not even expanding it more than that. Okay, and then saying risk two, and again, hopefully when you'd read through this, you would find that this gold standard, industry gold standard, okay, so look, it's really important. When you look at it, a lot of their business is predicated on having this gold standard. So, oh, sorry, I just need to let Una back in. Okay, so what is the risk? There's a risk that the accreditation is lost. Okay, and specifically, they could lose, there's a new contract reliant on this, okay, and could lead to lost contract, lost profit, those sorts of things, okay? Now, again, I'm not going into any more detail than that at this point. It's my plan. I'm doing a quick read through. I'm reading through the detail. I'm jotting down some notes. I'm being careful to think about exactly what the business risk is, i.e. the fact that it could have an impact on the business. So remember that when you're looking at business risk, you're not taking that step forward into saying that this particular asset or liability could be misstated or anything along those lines is too far down the line of an audit risk or a risk of material misstatement. We're taking it general at this point, okay? And it's really important to remember that so that you're framing the risk in the right way. Now, for this one, I think you can relate it to a standard because you can look at this line that says the percentage of timber harvested in line with the gold standard, and actually it has gone down. Okay, so I would be saying, and I would be flagging it, and maybe even putting a number and saying that the percentage of timber harvested in line has decreased. Okay, now remember at this stage, this is just notes almost to myself, okay, because I'm going to have to come back and go through this again and write this out in detail. But at this point, I'm trying to get a heading in. I'm trying to make a brief note of the ones that are the most important, okay? And as I go through, I keep doing that, okay? So I've got contract here, legal case, probably use of an expert probably isn't going to be. Then I'll go through the KPIs and see if there's anything that gives me more detail in there, et cetera, et cetera. So I go ahead and I do my risk 3, risk 4, risk 5, risk 6. Okay, so once I've done all of that, now I know that I'm being a bit pedantic here and I'm underlining stuff and I'm trying to make it look nice. I'm telling you now, as a marker, it makes a massive difference if you do that. It's so much easier to mark and you will get more marks. So keep it neat, structure your answer in a sensible, well laid out way, and you will get more marks. Okay, so where am I at this point? I'm at the point, let me just get rid of these for a second and then we'll look at them again in a second. Okay, so where am I at this point? I've got a nice heading for A. I know that it's 10 marks, so then I know that I'm going to do 5 to 6 risks, 2 marks each. I've got a little heading for each one and a little bit of detail. What do I do now? I now prioritize the ones that I can expand on the best. So I go here and I go, right, okay, risk 2, it's got a number on it and the percentage of timber has decreased. I mean, that's really obvious. And that's going to be really easy to talk about. I think that's far easier than even trying to explain exactly what the results of field international expansion could be. To just say, right, look, when they might not get this accreditation, they've got this new contract that's reliant on it. That might lead to them losing the contract, losing profit. And to prove it, I can look at the numbers and say, well, look, the percentage of timber harvested in this way is actually going down. It's an 80% requirement. They're at 85, they're now at 82. Well, what about next year? They're at 78 and they lose the accreditation. What impact would that have on the business? Lost contract, lost profit, et cetera, et cetera. I would be prioritizing that one. Not that I would copy and paste it. I would just expand on it first. Okay, so I expand on it and then I look for the next one that I think I can talk about the most and I expand on that and I keep doing that until my time is up. Now, if I've done that for 4 risks and my time is up, I move on. Because for risk 5, I'd probably get a mark, maybe even 2 for my little plan. And I do not want to go over my time no matter what, because that will cumulatively kill me at the end of the exam. So you're incorporating your planning into your read through. You're going back through and you're expanding upon it based on the prioritization. And the prioritization for me is in the order of, can I get more marks by relating it to a number? And can I talk about the thing easily? Am I confident in it? If I am, those 2 things, that's the one I'm going to talk about first, right through to the end when I'm talking about ones I'm not sure of, and those are the ones I'm just leaving and moving on to the next bit. Okay, does that approach work for everyone? Does everyone understand what I'm doing? So give me a thumbs up. Opportunity for a question at this point. So let's just pause and see, anybody want to pinpoint anything I've said and question it or check it or just clarify at this point? Right, okay, we're all thumbs, no questions at this point. So again, like this is not really about getting you to answer these questions, but let's just think about what the answer looks at. So again, I'm hoping that you do, but I'm not sure that all students make the best use of the answers and the answer plans. So the first thing I want to draw to your attention is, so this is the answer to this paper. I'm not even really bothered about what the actual answer is, but I will talk about that in a second. First thing you should always be looking at when you've done your answer is this bit. So let's look at exactly what you're getting here. Up to 2 marks for each business risk evaluated, okay? That's what we thought. Half a mark for each trend or calculation to back it up, maximum 2 marks. Now that means I could get away with what, 4 of these and 4 trends identified. So if every one of them, so if I did my prioritization right and prioritized the ones with a trend, and I did that for all 4 of my risks that I managed to type out in the time available, I still get full marks as long as I've done my risks accurately. So I would rather that you spent the requisite amount of time on less points and moved on, because this paper is not about identifying things. They're assuming, I mean, they put a heading. There's a heading called these. You're not going to get any marks for identifying that. The marks are in the gray areas, in the nuance, in the well-explained answer, in the fact that you know what a business risk is, as opposed to an audit risk, that you're describing it in the right way, that you're not saying, oh, well, this could be overvalued and that could be undervalued and this could be misstated, that you're saying profit could be affected, going concern could be affected. Those are the things that they're really looking for in business risks. So that's the first thing. Pay attention to exactly what the marks are for. Crucially important that you, as soon as you open up your requirement, you can see and you know how you're going to bulk out and build up your marks. Secondly, let's just look at a couple of these business risks. Now, again, each one of these is far more than you would be expected to say in the exam, but I just want to pinpoint a couple of things. Number one, put some introduction in. There's a couple of marks for professional stuff, easy to get. Make sure you do that. So let's take the international expansion. So the expansion introduces the business risks, got a foreign country, it's remote, and they'll have to make regular visits, oversight, etc., different laws. So like operating in a foreign country, different laws, no experience in the harvesting of these trees. Essentially, remember, you got to say, what is the risk? So the bit that I'm interested in is actually this bit. There's a risk that it is not successful. That's the risk. Okay, what's that going to do? Well, it's going to give a drain on time and resources. Your operations might suffer as a result. Okay, now there is scope. If you've described it in a slightly different way, but you're saying, well, the business could be damaged in this way, as long as it's reasonable, you're going to get your marks. Okay, but you just got to be careful that that's what you're doing. Comparing to the one that we thought we could write more on, which is the next one. So look, what have we got here? We've got, there's a risk. So again, we're saying, what is the risk? There is a risk that the accreditation might not be renewed. Please, please, please make sure that you are writing the risk here is. There is a risk that. That is what you need to be writing at each stage, okay? Implications for reputation, the new contract, which we talked about, which accounts for an increase. Oh yeah, which largely accounts, so yeah, here's bits that are important because look, increase of 5.5% in revenue, the 80%, the projected 82, just above the 80, it's gone down. Is that two trends? Is that two half marks? Possibly. So if you can get two things in there, feel free to do that. Okay. It's linked to ethical practice, indications that they're questionable. Yeah, so later on they talk about the employees and the incentive. Look, I mean, again, this is the bit that I think is really important to pick out. This could result in customers cancelling contracts, resulting in a loss of revenue and cash flow. That's the bit that students don't do. So there's two, in fact, three things I've highlighted here, and they are the three key problems with this type of question. Number one, you don't say what the risk is. The risk is that they don't get this accreditation. Simple, but people don't say it. They talk more generally than that. Two, they don't relate it to a number when that's available. Simple, easy marks. Make sure you've opened the numbers and make sure that you relate to the number. And three, they don't say what could be the result of the risk if it were to manifest. Well, if you lost this accreditation, customers might cancel their contracts, and that could result in a loss of revenue and cash flow. Okay, now I reckon if you just said the highlighted bits there, now I know that they've said more than that in their answer. If I was a marker and you literally wrote out the highlighted bits there with very little else, with a few conjoining words, I'd find it very difficult not to give you, 1.5 to 2 marks. Okay, so don't be fooled by the fact that the examiner's answers are very wordy. They are. They get paid to sit and make up everything they can think of. You don't have time for that. You need to be specific and you need to get into what's the risk, what could it result in, and how will that affect the business? And if you can link that to a number, then you got to do that. Right, okay, look, does that make sense to everybody? Because I'm going to leave business risks now. So are we happy with what I've said so far? Now is the opportunity for questions. If you have any to pop in the chat or you want to unmute, do that. Pop your thumb up if you're happy, just to let me know you haven't fallen asleep or run away. Good, okay, got some thumbs. Good, okay. Just wait and see if there's anything coming through. When it says trends, can you define that? Well, that's a tricky one. I personally think that is anything that relates to a number that supports your hypothesis. I think by putting them in the answer here, so these bits that they have here of this relating to the increase of 5.5% and the reference to the metric of 82 and 80, they're implying that that is the trends that they're looking for. And the increase of 5.5% is a trend. And the metric, the projected metric, is a projected trend. Therefore, that's, I think, from my reading of it, is what they're looking for. So my definition of that is a number that is moving in a way that supports what you are hypothesizing. But don't write that down. Does that make sense, Ronan? Yeah, okay, cool. Right, okay. Let's just have a think then about the second requirement here. So evaluate the audit risks. Okay, so this is a bit more. So let's think, what's an audit risk? So an audit risk is the risk that something is over or understated or not disclosed when it should be. Okay, now you'll see that sometimes they ask for the risk of material misstatement. I'm hoping that you picked up from the session that this audit risk includes inherent risk and control risk and detection risk. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is that the fact that detection risk is included here makes a big difference, because inherent risk and control risk are the risk of material misstatement. They are essentially the risk that there is a misstatement in the financial statements. So it's come about by, one of those business risks manifesting, or there's poor controls and there's been an error or a fraud, and that's resulted in a misstatement. The detection risk, it actually opens up to easier things. So it means that you can start bulking out your marks with easier risks, because detection risk is things like, it's a new client, you're under a tight reporting deadline, you're a new auditor on the team. Anything that would mean that it's less likely that you would detect whatever it is. Okay. Now, if they ask for risk of material misstatement, detection risk is not part of that. So risk of material misstatement, if they asked for that, would just be inherent risk and control risk. Okay. And that's the difference. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important for this question because it is a new client, for example. So therefore, there's a risk that you don't detect it because you don't know their systems, et cetera, et cetera. So it actually opens you up to get a few more marks, because it's 20 marks. There's quite a lot of marks available. So you're going to have to think about that. Now, the other thing to think about in comparison to business risks is you'll get more marks. So I want you to start budgeting for 3 marks per risk, but it must be well explained using the terminology above. Okay, i.e., you must be saying what could be overstated, understated, or not disclosed, and why, in order to pick up all those marks. You will then be able to relate to a number, just like we did with the business risks, in order to pick up those extra marks. Okay, so again, I would be doing exactly the same things for this. I'd be saying, right, okay, risk number 1. Okay, so risk number 1 is whatever. In fact, I already said it's a new client, which we read whenever we were doing the read through there. So what does that mean? It just means that you've got, so that increases protection risk. You could also mention opening balances. You could just talk about the fact that it's more difficult. Now, having said that, it's probably unlikely that you'll pick up 3 marks for that risk. So you got to understand that. But it's a good way to break yourself in gently and pick up the marks that are available. Okay, so we have seen that one as we go. There's also in the background information a little bit about oh no, so that's not where it was. Must be in the meeting. It's somewhere else anyway, but they talk about there's corporate governance, there's pressure on results. So there's general things in there as well. Okay, so again, you'd be doing your read through, you'd be taking these things and you'd be starting with your plan, putting in your headings, getting the detail. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to just look at 1 or 2 of the more complicated ones. So I'm not like the new client, the corporate governance, the what else is there? The results, pressure on results because they're under a bit of pressure because of the poor results, etc. Like I'm not, that's good, but you can get those. I'm thinking more about ones that might be a bit more difficult. Like for example, there's one we picked out here. So what about this one? They're providing a grant of 20 million on the condition that you have sustainable and ethical business practices, specifically for training the workforce and building the accommodation. Okay. Grant to be received in September X5 and expenditure will commence in November X5. Half of the amount received is to be recognized in this year. So what are we working up to here? Just let me check that. 30th September. Oh, okay. 30th September X5. So this is where you need to think about your accounting knowledge because that doesn't sound like the right treatment to me. So here I'd be getting a heading in of government grant. Okay, now this one, again, what do I need to know here? What do I need to be able to say? I need to say that, first of all, they've got a government grant. It is received September 20X5. But related to expenditure, well, from November 20X5. Okay, now that's post year end. Okay, they are proposing to recognize 50% of that. That doesn't seem right. Okay, so what I would be saying is that there is a risk of overstatement of revenue. Okay, by 20 divided by 2, 10 million. That's an awful lot. Okay, and again, I know for a fact I'm going to be able to relate that to a number because what's the effect going to be on profit if that actually happens? Okay. The other thing we need to do every single time is we need to calculate materiality. And I know for a fact this is going to be material. Okay. but calculate materiality and comment on it. Look, if it would not be a bad idea if you said to me, what I'm going to do is I am going to identify all the risks and write a couple of notes. And then I'm going to go through the top 6 of them. And I'm literally going to start by writing out, this amounts to 10% of profit, assets, whatever, and therefore is material, highly material, whatever, for every single one of them. Because you're going to be getting marks for every single one of those. And then going back to them and expanding on the accounting treatment, etc. That to me would not be a bad idea. If you said that's what you were going to do, I'd be saying, well, yeah, that wouldn't be a bad idea, because you know you're going to get marks for the materiality discussion. You're going to get marks for materiality. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. So materiality always has to be discussed. You need to say, well, look, what's a little bit of detail that is the risk? And then what is the actual risk? There is a risk that the revenue is overstated, okay? Related to a number, what's the profit effect? Calculate materiality, comment on it. You could even say risk of understatement of provisions if you didn't think they were going to meet the criteria that was required for this government grant. But again, I'd just be writing the notes in at this point. So those are the notes as I did my read through. I maybe wouldn't even have as much detail as that, but I want you to understand what I'm trying to say for each one. So I'd be reading through, I'd be noting each of those down, and then I'd be prioritizing based on the risk, and I'd be expanding upon it. Okay, now, those are all going to be the same. I'm going to have a standard paragraph that I say, which is there's a risk here that X could be overstated. It makes up X amount of assets and therefore is material. The treatment should be this, but they've done that, and therefore it's going to be overstated by this amount. I'm saying the same thing every time. Repeat, repeat, repeat. I'm going to be prioritizing based on the ones I can link to a number and the ones that I feel that I can expand on. What I wouldn't be doing, by the way, is spending a lot of time on the easy ones. So I know whenever I get these papers in, what I'm going to get is a lot of time spent on the 3 or 4 risks that are really simplistic. You're going to find it easier to bulk your marks, or you're going to find it more difficult to bulk your marks out on the fact that it's a new client, the fact that they're looking for a listing or they're under pressure. Those general ones are going to be harder to bulk your marks out. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? So let's just check, are we on the same page here, or do we need some questions? So thumbs up if you're reasonably happy with what I've said there. Opportunity for questions if you just want to see or clarify anything that I've said. Right, okay. Hey, welcome back. So we're continuing just to think about audit risks. Now, we're going to spend most of tonight on the question 1 tonight. You know, we'll get a quick of a look at the rest of the paper, but I just want to explain why I'm doing that, because this audit risk area is so important, and it's not just for this area, it's for other areas of the paper. I want to point out that when later on we see it asking for matters to consider and evidence required, or matters to consider and procedures to carry out, the matters to consider are exactly the same things as I've just been talking to you about this. So if I'd been given a government grant like this in another question with the requirement, what are the matters to consider? I would be saying exactly the same thing. that is essentially another example of an audit risk question. Likewise, you'll get a reporting question that says, what are the matters to consider and the effect on the audit report? In which case I'd be doing the matters to consider in exactly the same way as I've done these audit risks here. So it permeates the entire paper. So I know we're spending a bit more time on the question one, but that actually, if you can do that, you can do an awful lot of the rest of the paper. Not only that, but you know that at least 25 to 30 marks in this paper, question one, will be in this area of business risks, audit risks, risk of material misstatement. I would be aiming to come out of that with like 27 out of 30, because it means that when you do the rest of the paper, you really just need to eke it out and get over the line. So that's why I'm spending a bit of time on it. And that's why I think you should make sure that you are 100% happy with exactly how you're going to approach question one in particular, but the paper as a whole as well, because the approach will define how you do. Okay, so let's just think about then what the mark scheme says about this, both in terms of marks and then in terms of explanation. So we'll go to the end and just look at the marks first. So as I said, I'm going to budget 3 marks for that, but there's a bit more to it than that. So up to 3 marks for each audit risk evaluated. Other ones are relevant, so that's fine as well. Materiality calculations, 1 mark each. Okay, so, okay, I said you might do 5. I might do 5 anyway, because just in case I get 1 or 2 of them wrong. Okay, so if you can do materiality, do it. Because what does that mean? It essentially means if you do 3 good materiality calculations and 4 trends or calculations, you're going to be sitting on 5 marks out of 20. Okay, that's a quarter of the marks. So you can get a quarter of the marks without too much effort. Okay, and okay, you have to make the trend relevant, so you need to know what you're talking about, but you take my point. Okay, so government grant, up to 4 marks on the government grant. That'll be because the provision could be brought in as well. But think about that. That means from what I wrote there, so from my explanation here, I reckon that I can get what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I reckon I can get 5 marks for that. So let's just think about that. So let's say that we do a really good government grant with a materiality calculation and 2 other materiality calculations. We're sitting on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out of 20. We've almost passed the question just by talking about 1 risk with the materiality calculation and calculating materiality for the other areas. I mean, that's the way that you need to be thinking about this. If you go into this paper and you just go, right, I'm just going to read the requirement and just go blah and start talking about it, you're really not getting it. And you're probably going to end up identifying far too many things, not really getting any marks for explaining them, not getting the marks for materiality and calculations, and missing the point. Okay, so it's really important that you have a set idea as to how you're going to approach this. Okay, so look, there's loads of other things there. If you know what an audit risk is and you can calculate materiality, you should be getting 20 marks in that. You really should. It's not difficult to do that. But you need to know a little bit about it, and you need to know your accounting standards. Okay, so just to think about that grant. That's business risks. Right, audit risks. Okay, government grant, 20 million, 3.6 total assets, material to the statement of financial position. 1 mark. Okay, they've said they're going to recognize 10 million. Profit before tax is only 6.5. I think you might get half a mark for that. Possibly. Although they might pull it in with materiality, but I'd definitely be saying it anyway. Okay, so the risk is whether it should be recognized as income. Okay, so it may be that you've overstated the profit, understated liabilities. It should probably be recognized as deferred income because the expenses don't start to next year. It relates to those. Recognizing half of it doesn't seem to be the right thing to do. Okay, again, it's the highlighted bits there that are important. I also said that if the conditions weren't met, you might have to repay it. So therefore, you might need a provision or a contingent liability, a note to the financial statements. Okay, so again, the risk is that they haven't done that, understated liabilities, inadequate disclosure. Think back to what I said originally here about what is an audit risk. An audit risk is something is overstated or understated or not disclosed, and you must explain it in that way. How have they explained it? They have said possibly understated or inadequate disclosure, overstated profit, understated liability. These are the terms that you need to be repeating. These are the things that the markers are going to be looking for. They see understated profit, they give you a mark. Okay. Right. Does that make sense to everybody? Can you again give me a thumbs up if you're happy? Can you pop me in a question if there's anything on audit risk that you want to clarify? Right, good. We got lots of thumbs there. Sorry, lose my voice. Okay. Right. So, look, that's how we deal with business risks and business risks and audit risk. That's how we plan our question 1 with a particular view of the risks as opposed to the other parts of the question. Let's just move on. We'll move through the paper a bit more quickly now and just think about what they're looking for, how you might give it, things that are important, things that maybe aren't as important, and a bit of technique as to how you might deal with it. So this one's really important because it comes up all the time. So design the audit procedures to be performed in relation to whatever. Okay, the timber plantation asset, that sort of thing, including those relating to the expert appointed by management that they've performed. Okay, so look, they've got this fair value for this timber valuation asset under IAS2. The accounting treatment doesn't matter that much, but it's the fact that there's been an external expert appointed by management, and we need to think about that. Okay, so first of all, the evaluation of the expert, you should be thinking about independence, objectivity, all those sorts of things. But when you're thinking about procedures, because procedures are something that is done really badly, and I mean really badly, okay, I want you to be thinking about it in this way. I want you to think, what documentation exists to support whatever number you're looking at. Okay. So there's going to be some sort of documentation. If you don't work in audit, which I'm presuming a lot of you don't, well, then you need to think about, right, my boss has asked me to do something. So let's say your boss said, look, I'm not sure about the fair value on that timber plantation asset. Can you go and just check that it's right for me, please? I mean, would you go back to your boss and just verbally, or even give them a bit of paper and saying, yeah, the valuation is accurate? Or would you have a little bit of a file or a folder that had some evidence to say, yeah, we think that that is a reasonable valuation? Maybe on the front of it, you've got the valuer's report. And then behind that, you've just done a bit of a check. So is the valuer trustworthy and independent and objective? And then what about the numbers that are in that valuation? Where did they come from? What are they? Do they look reasonable considering what you know about the situation? Does it all add up arithmetically? Are there any complex calculations that you could reperform? Think about it in that way, and then explain why you're testing that area in that way. Okay, you must do both bits of that, no matter how simplistic that seems. Okay, and in doing that, you get both parts of the question or the answer. You're saying, right, okay, I am going to check this in order to verify this to ensure that the valuation is correct. Okay, so you've got to take all those steps in order to get your marks. And like things like evaluate assumptions, probably not going to be good enough. Check the documentation, not enough. It has to be specific. What are you going to check and why are you going to check it? Now, I think this one's actually easier because you've got this expert appointed by management. So look, again, just thinking about the answer, you can think yourselves. Hopefully, these are the sorts of things that you are thinking about this. But what are we thinking about for the things to check? Okay, so let's just look at the broad-based audit procedures. Get the experts' reports, methodology, overall results. That's pretty easy. Discuss it with management to confirm the rationale. Check the qualifications, experience. Check the independence. Like 2 marks for that. That's absolute. That's a gift. Okay. Visit the site of the storm to view the scale of the destruction. Okay. So just, I think whenever students are thinking about procedures, they try to remember or memorize a set of procedures. You would be far better saying, what is it I'm trying to check? I am trying to check the fair value of a forest. How would I think about what a forest is worth? Well, I might go and look at it and make sure all the trees aren't, what's the word? I was going to say, yeah, horizontal as opposed to vertical. I'm not a mathematician, but make sure the trees are standing up is what I'm trying to say. You know, is there a broadly the number of trees there that I expect to see? Does it fit with my expectations? There's been this storm, so see if there's any evidence of the damage of the storm. Is there any way to sell the damaged trees? And then you've got some formal things where you could go, right, we'll check it to the non-current asset register to confirm the value. Let's see what this one say. Whether use of the report is necessary to provide sufficient appropriate evidence given the materiality. Yes, we need to look at materiality and see. Develop do your own estimate of the change in fair value and compare it. Get the insurance policy. Again, look, you're not going to learn that. You are not going to learn that in a book, okay? That is just common sense. You're on the ground. You need to confirm a number. Can you think of any evidence you could get to confirm it? You're far better thinking of procedures in that way than trying to think, oh, what are the procedures about fair value? Can I remember them? Were they written down? Not really, because it's a very specific situation, and you as the auditor need to come up with some evidence that would verify the number that you're looking at. Okay, I see a couple of questions coming in, so let me just check them here. So Grace, for the audit procedures questions, lots of times they ask for procedures on 2 different things worth 10 marks. Is this split evenly? The marking scheme isn't really clear. For example, if I was struggling with one and wrote 3 procedures, but wrote 7 good procedures for the other, would you get all the marks or not waste the time writing more than 5 of one of them? The answer to that is it depends. If the mark scheme doesn't specify, so if you've looked at the mark scheme here and it doesn't specifically say maximum marks, because if you look at this one, it says down here, maximum marks. Okay, if it doesn't say that underneath each little heading, well then, yeah, you can split them up. Now, that's more prevalent when it comes to, let's see if there's an example in this paper. No, look, in other papers, it says things like matters to consider and procedures to carry out, 10 marks. And in the answer, it's pretty much split. Matters to consider is half of it and the procedures are half of it. Actually, if it was 10 marks, you could write out 10 procedures. And if your 10 good procedures were right, the matters to consider would be irrelevant. So yeah, I mean, theoretically, you could write 7 for one, 3 for the other and get 10, but you just need to be careful in the mark plan that it doesn't say that. Personally, it doesn't take that long to write a procedure. So I would be taking the risk. If there was one that I felt I had more for, as long as I'm not taking up a load of time, as long as I'm not going way over my time allocation, I would write them out. And that sort of goes for everything. I pretty much, whenever I was doing the exam, I wrote up to my time allocation and then I moved on regardless. So it didn't really matter where I was. So yeah, I mean, theoretically, that is possible that you can get full marks by splitting it slightly differently than 50-50. Right, okay, look, procedures, I cannot say it any better than that, because if you look at those, you see that, okay, some of them are standard, obtain confirmation of the qualifications and the independence. Yeah, got to do that, obviously. But the other ones are very specific to the situation. They're not learn a list of procedures and regurgitate them. It's just not going to be like that. So you've got to think that little bit more laterally. And you know what? Use your time allocation and move on. Right, okay, let's check. Any more questions just on procedures? I know it's a big part, but I think that pretty much summarizes it for me. So give me a thumbs up if you're reasonably happy with the concept. Pop me in a question if you want to clarify. Good, okay, lots of thumbs, right. Okay. Can procedures show up in section B? Yes. Yeah, they can show up anywhere. I think in this question, I think in this paper there are some procedures in section B. Yeah. Yeah, they're like procedures are fundamental. Okay, so yeah. Right, okay, let's have a quick look just at what we had left on this question. Okay, so we see 6 marks for procedures. D. Okay, now ethics. So again, I think this is a good question because it covers out 3 or 4 of the really major areas. You know that you are going to be examined on business risks, audit risks, or risk of material misstatement, or some combination of those. Okay, guaranteed. You know there are going to be procedures on your paper. Guaranteed, nailed on, going to be on the paper. you know for a fact ethics is going to be on your paper. Okay, so what have you got to do? Well, you've got to apply the same technique that we talked about. Okay, so I just want to summarize the fact that you need to state the threat. I'm really thinking about the ethical part of this first. And when I say state the threat, I want you to explain what could happen. And I suppose then to say, then explain what could happen as a result. Okay, now why do I say that? Because, sorry, there's a ladybird on my keyboard. That's weird. I must make sure not. Really don't want to crush that, so hold on a second. Sorry, ladybird rescue. It's a long time since I've seen a ladybird, never mind one in here. Anyway, sorry. Ethical threat. Yes, so what you find is that students will tend to be able to identify the threat. Okay, so you can see it's a self-interest threat. What they then go on to explain is that it's a threat because, let's just take a simple one. The finance director is related to the audit senior. Okay, so it's a self-interest or a familiarity threat. It's a familiarity threat because there's a relationship there between the two. And that could mean that they are overly familiar or something along those lines. Okay, but that's not really the threat. The threat is not the fact that they are related to each other. The threat is the fact that the judgment of the auditor could be compromised by the relationship. They could be reluctant to raise issues. Okay, so you're looking for things here like reluctance to raise issues, cover up things even, incentive to ignore issues. You know, that's the sort of thing that can happen as a result of the threat. So you got it. Yes, you've got to say, oh yeah, this is a familiarity threat. But then you've got to take the second step and say, it's a familiarity threat because as a result, the auditor could be reluctant to do this to highlight these issues, or they could cover up those issues or ignore them, or, you know, those are the things that are crucially important here to explain. So you've not just got to say, well, this is a self-interest threat and expect that that's obvious. You've got to then go on to say, because you've got this relationship where you own these shares, you do this, and that could lead to these things. And then you've got to say, what are you going to do about it? What are the possible safeguards? Okay. And in this one, what you've got to be saying is, how great a threat is it? And what is reasonable? Okay, now, for some things, it'll simply be that it's not allowed. You can't do that. So you can't hold shares in the client, for example. And there's not much more that you can say about that. You just have to go with it and say, well, look, you know, therefore they need to be disposed of. Okay. So, but I suppose you might be able to go on and say, well, if they can't dispose of them, then you need to remove the person from the audit team and things like that. But only once you've done that do you come to a conclusion. Okay, now it's this bit in the middle, this bit where the bulk of the marks are. So you've really got to get that bit right. And that's the bit where people fall down. They tend to say, right, well, this is a familiarity threat. And okay, they could do this safeguard, but they just shouldn't be on the audit. Rather than saying, well, it's a familiarity threat because of these things. That could lead to this. There's this they could do. There's that they could do. If it was a less serious threat, they could do this. But overall, I would imagine they should do this. Okay. So look, it's really important that you get that and that you think about how you explain these, because, you know, it's usually actually quite a short piece of information. So let's look at this one in relation to the phone call. So here's the notes from the phone call. I mean, there's not an awful lot in that. Okay. And there's 10 marks available for the ethical and professional issues, or sorry, it's the ethical and planning implications. So it's not like you've got loads and loads of information. You're going to have to generate the ideas from a limited amount of information that you're given. Okay, so it's important that you're able to do that. Again, just thinking then about what they were going to give the marks for. And remember, it is ethics. I'm focusing on the ethics there, but planning implications are important as well. What were they looking at for this one? And again, once you're into these types of questions, you're generally, as it says here, 1 mark per point. But again, it has to be clearly expressed and it needs to be relevant. So we've got other information that they have to review it for material inconsistencies. Self-review threat. Assurance can be example of safeguards. So again, what are they giving you? They're giving you marks for the example of the safeguards, separating it from the audit fee, can't be on a contingent basis. Again, look, these are all things that you will come up with through doing previous exam papers, through practicing these ethics questions, and you'll find things that recur and recur, okay? Just thinking about the discussions, let's just see what way they have discussed it in the answer. Okay, so I just want to look for one that, so here's one here. Self-review threat to objectivity. So stated the threat. They've been asked to provide assurance and what could happen. There it is, sorry. They would be reluctant to raise queries or highlight errors that have been made when reading the information. Okay, so just think about that, because you might, if you're going through and marking your own work, you might give yourself marks for saying, well, it's a potential self-review threat because they're reading it in the course of the audit, and not go on to get that bit. What could happen as a result? Well, as a result, they might be reluctant to raise queries or highlight errors. Okay, so again, let's see if there's another one. Okay, so there's another threat. So this fee could rise to a self-interest threat, as it is in the financial interest of the firm to give a favorable assurance opinion in order to secure the income. So again, they're saying it's a self-interest threat, but they're not leaving it at that. They're going on to say, well, as a result, they could be giving a favorable audit opinion in order to secure the income. Okay. So again, look, ethics, I think, is actually one of those easy questions that students do terribly in. They don't do very well because they don't go on to explain things like what could happen as a result. They don't explain enough safeguards or go into enough detail. And they just don't say enough. They tend to speak in short, really short sentences when you've got to expand with those points that I've made. Grace, has a message here. When is it acceptable to use bullet points? Procedures only. I wouldn't use bullet points at all. I wouldn't use bullet points in this paper. I know that they say, oh, well, for procedures, you could do bullet points. I think if you put a bullet point in, you're going to be just write a sentence. You know, you don't need a bullet point. So just new line, new sentence, line and a half. I just wouldn't write bullet points at all. And just because it at least makes it appear that you're writing less. And the examiner in their examiner's report always says, oh, too many students are just using bullet points, not writing enough, not expanding enough. And I wouldn't want to give the examiner the impression that I was doing that by using bullet points essentially anywhere in the exam, okay? Right, let's just check on ethics, whether we're happy with that approach and process. So give me a thumbs up if that's something you're happy with. Pop me in a question. If there's anything, again, that you just want to check with me at this point, clarify anything you're not sure of. You got thumbs coming through. Right, okay. Let's keep going a little bit then. So, look, what have we done so far? We know that, as I've said, risks is going to be in question 1. We want to have our marks bulked up. We're looking for 27 out of 30, if that's about where it is. We know that procedures are going to be examined somewhere in the paper, maybe more than once. We know that ethics is going to be examined in the paper, maybe more than once. What else do we know, even just looking at this paper? Well, if we move on, so that's question 1, we pretty much dealt with it. If we move on to section B, 2 questions of 25 marks, do I know what I'm expecting? Well, pretty much. I reckon that somewhere are going to be these matters to consider. So let's see. So it's not in here, actually. It must be in the next one. But let's have a look at this. What do we have? So in relation to, yes, quality and quality control. Now, again, you guys are not in audit, but audit is being taken over the coals at the minute for quality. So the quality of auditing is being questioned. Therefore, it is highly likely that quality will come up. Now, in the session on quality, I gave you like 6 headings. I gave you keywords like supervision, planning, all of those things. But having said that, you'll have to be specific to what they give you. So for example, let's just take one of these at random. So let's look at Dean Company. So let's see what's wrong. Oh, okay. So Dean owns a small number of shares amounting to a 2% holding. Or sorry, in this amounted to a 2% holding. Okay, so even before that, what do I know? 2% shareholding, that's not going to be an associate or a subsidiary, that's just going to be a financial asset. Okay, so it's accounted as a financial asset under fair value. Okay, that seems okay. The shares are not traded in an active market. So what does that mean? It means that they're going to be harder to value. It means that it's going to be subjective. How are you even going to get a value on those? Value of 68,000 is management's estimate. So what do I know about that? I think, well, that's judgmental. ISA 540 management estimates. I start to think, can I be sure of this? So again, the quality control here is going to be something along the lines of, how do I determine that this is accurate? How do I make sure I've got the expertise? Who did this for us? Who reviewed this? Are they sufficiently experienced? Was there an expert involved? Should I get an expert? These are the things that are popping into my mind straight away. Okay, the audit team checked the arithmetical accuracy, but did not obtain further evidence. Oh dear, oh dear. Quality control. We want to get more evidence than that. How have you proven that this 68,000 is accurate? It's a management estimate. Did you treat it with skepticism? Doesn't sound like it. Okay, the value is below the group materiality. Oh, hold on a second. This is a component, not the group. We should be using component materiality, which is at a lower level. So, okay. The latest financial statements prepared show the audit file to provide background information. Company has net assets, 550,000. Just reaching for my calculator, even if I valued this business on a net assets basis, 550 times 2% is 11,000. 68,000 is a lot more than that. Okay, those are the things that are popping into my head. Okay, so look, again, you're just looking for potential problems. And all of those things that I've said are potential problems. There's no market to determine this. It's subjective. Management have made the estimate. From quality control perspective, we haven't got any further evidence. Arithmetical accuracy is not enough. We need to understand management's conclusions on this. How did they come to that calculation? We need to review it. We need to consider the use of an expert. Okay. We need to think about whether that valuation is reasonable based on the net assets. We need to work out why they're using group materiality instead of component materiality. Remember, group materiality is for the whole group, but we need to look at the component and think about the materiality for that. So again, you're just looking for problems when it comes to these quality control sections. So let's just have a quick look at that. What was that, Dean? I'll just go to the mark scheme actually. Okay, so Dean, lack of skepticism. I said that, not being sufficiently skeptic. Likely to be overvalued. I did work it out and say 11,000 for the net assets could have a material impact on their financial statements. They've applied group materiality at a component level when they should be using component materiality rather than group materiality. Okay, so remember the materiality for each component. Now, whether that then feeds through to being a misstatement at the group level, we'll assess that later on. Okay, and how did they explain that? So let's just look and see if they said anything else interesting here. Using interesting in the loosest terms. They've accepted the valuation, not verified by the audit team, need more skepticism. Yeah, they did the 2% amounting to 11. They need to work out why that is. It might be material to their individual financial statements. We can then assess whether it feeds up into the audit, the group audit. Yeah, there's a risk that the subsidiaries' individual financial statements have their own opinion. Look, you're just looking for potential problems. That's the thought process that you've got to be going through as you do that. Does that make sense? Can you pop me in a thumb up if it does? If you think, oh, right, okay, yeah, I can at least have a stab at that. Now, having said that, I think that's more difficult than the risks and the ethics piece. I'd be wanting to bulk my marks out on the risks and the ethics, and then really only eking myself over the line on this because it's more difficult to do. You can't be as sure that that's what they're looking for. So, you know, that's fine. You're going to find some parts of this paper more difficult. But what you got to do is bulk your marks out in the bits you can do, and then just get over the line in the rest of it. Right, okay. Running a little bit short on time, so let's just finish off because we've been talking a lot tonight about what you know is going to be on the paper. What do you know is going to be on the paper? Reporting is going to be on this in some form. Okay, so what have we got? Requirement A. Oh, look, there's our matters to be considered. and audit evidence, railway operating license and going concern, customer list, chairman's statement. Now, I said that those audit risk or that audit risk process that I talked about in the first requirement was going to be applicable to matters to be considered. Let's have a look. So if we go to the, doesn't even matter what the requirement or what the question is here. If I go to the answer, okay, so they need to disclose material uncertainties. Materiality needs to be discussed. Declining revenue and profit. That's all going concern, so that's fine. Materiality, intangible assets, possible manipulation. Okay, rules, accounting rules for impairment. Impairment loss should be recognized in P&L. These are all, if I was answering question 1, audit risks, these would all be the same things that I'd be doing. Materiality, what could be overstated or understated, this asset, it's intangible asset or whatever asset that they're saying should be impaired. So the purchase list, what else have they got? Oh, well, then the chairman's statement actually is other information. The point I am making here is when you get this matters to consider, they are talking about the same things as risks of material misstatement and audit risk. They're talking about what could be overstated or understated, why, what's the accounting treatment that could have been done wrong, and is it material? You do all those, you get most of your marks. And then the evidence is the procedures or the actual evidence that you gather to get it. So don't think that by focusing a lot on the risks of material misstatement and the audit risk that you're neglecting other parts of the paper, because there's like 15 marks that was essentially the same as that audit risk part of the paper as well. So that's like, 35 marks for being able to do that technique on audit risk, although there's evidence here as well. So maybe 30 marks or something like that. There is a lot of the paper that is going to be related to that concept of, is it material? What could be overstated or understated? What's the accounting treatment? And how have they done it wrong or potentially done it wrong? Finally, then, the procedures or the evidence are just to check it. So again, same things as we talked about earlier with the procedures. Press reports, well, look, you can't legislate for that in the textbook. It's just based on the scenario. Correspondence. Board minutes, review of board minutes is always good for things like this. Budgets and cash flow, if it's going concern, are always going to be important. Bank facilities, ask management. Actually, for going concern, there's standard things you can do, so it's worth knowing them. That's a good wee list of them there. Okay. Finally, then, the final thing you know that you're going to be asked about is the audit report. Okay, so requirement B here is, with reference to Exhibit 2, assuming no further adjustments, evaluate the appropriateness of the audit report. Okay, so again, this is a really common question. They give you the audit report, and essentially you're saying, well, do I agree with it? Is it all set out properly? Does it use appropriate language? Does it agree with what I think? If you do past paper questions, you'll see repeated examples of this. And again, it's the standard things that come up. So let's see what they were looking for on this one. Okay, so the opinion, they don't think is correct. The pervasiveness, they don't think is correct. They should be explaining, it is relation to going concern, so they need to explain it. Key audit matters, they discuss, so what's it for? Doesn't seem like they've done it appropriately here. Inconsistencies in the chairman's statement that we mentioned earlier should be in the other information section. Again, look, even just go through and read 5 questions on audit reporting, read the answers, and I'll guarantee at least 50% of the same things are going to come up in a future question, because there's only a limited number of things and ways that can be answered or asked. So it's all, there's going to be an element of repetition in it. Okay. Right. Look, that is us almost up to time. At the end of that paper, look, the key things I want you to take from tonight are that idea of planning as you go, putting in the requirements, putting in the headings, building it up through a plan as you do a read through, and then bulking it out, prioritizing where you think you'll score marks. Secondly, there are things you know you're going to be questioned on here. So there are technical articles on a lot of them, and there are lots of questions on them. Question 1 with risks. They're going to be asked. You got to know how to deal with them. Ethics, going to come up, be able to deal with that. Quality control, very regular. Procedures, reporting, matters to consider. The things I've mentioned, it's not that many of them. If you can do them, you can probably do 70% of the paper that you're going to sit. So it's crucially important that you spend time between now and the exam focusing on those areas. If I was leading into the exam, what I would be doing is I would be reading a technical article or 2 a day, and I would be practicing questions, focusing on those areas if I hadn't done a lot of questions yet. Or if I've done that, I'd then start to get into those other areas that you can fit in around this. Right, okay, I see a couple of questions coming through. Grace, in terms of the technical articles, I've seen some exam answers. It said the question related to technical articles published before the exam. I've looked on ACCA, but how do I know which ones are newly published, or can you tell? No, you can't really tell. There might be, there's no published, I don't think there's a published date on them. Look, to be honest, it doesn't take that long to read it. It's only audit. It's not like there's anything too technical. I would be reading as many of them as I can, to be honest. But I mean, let me just have a look at them actually, because I might be able to tell just from. Corporate governance. That's not you. No, that's been there. Oh, it's gone. And that, whilst it is, yeah, so actually I would just flag that. Let me just put that one in the, that goes into a bit more detail about risk. And that is a recent article. Okay, so that one there, actually, I would read that in detail. I know that's long, but that's long because it's relevant. So I would definitely read that one on ISA 315, okay? Because whilst ISA 315 hasn't changed that much, there were a few revisions and a couple of little bits and pieces that that were brought in. So that's one that I would definitely read. So I would prioritize that one. Not bothered about that. think that's fairly new. I don't remember seeing. Yep, there's one there. Whilst it's not as important, that's relatively new. Look, audit risk, always important, but it's not new. The exam technique ones are not new. I'm going to yeah, there's a lot in here right enough. That's not new, that's not new. These ones, these current issues, I would make sure and read those. Okay, so anything with current issues under that section, please make sure you've looked at. I could say, I don't want to give you too many because I know that, but the professional skepticism is important as well, but it's a bit more general. So I would say the two that I've put in there and the current issues, the ones on, where would that go? The current issues. Okay, so that's like 5. Okay, so just have a look at those ones. But the one I would definitely 100% number 1 is that first one, the risk. Okay, so the risk and understanding the entity. Right, okay. Let's just see if there's any more questions. So are there any other questions that anyone wants to even just unmute rather than typing in? So I'm happy to take, in fact, I'll turn the recording off just in case you don't want recorded, that's fine.